Very good. You have to be here after the election. Bit cocky.
Good morning. Good job. You would be extremely excited this morning and what the most before the state of that was. Fantastic. That's wonderful.
Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this council meeting. So welcome to councillors and staff, to anyone watching the live stream, and a very warm welcome to media who are present in the chamber for the first time in a while today. So great to have these elements of normality coming back in. So we've got some reasonably chunky things to deal with in the council meeting. So we'll work our way through those. Colin will be jumping at the bit to actually get on with his power meeting, so we don't want to make him wait for that. But anyway, we'll work our way through as best and effectively as we can. So I have an apology from Councillor Williams. Is there any other apologies? None. Someone like to move? We receive that. Councillor Tevendale, Councillor Kingan. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We have any declarations of interest? Deputy Mayor Tevendale.
On 6.4, 6.5 and 8.2 with Waitaki District Health Services Limited, just noting that I'm a director, but I will stay in the room because I think I've got stuff to add from council and directorship points of view. Yep,
no, good as gold, and I think a lot of that predates your appointment as well. So, but no, thank you for that. Anything else? Okay, moving on to leadership report. So my report, just going to that. Got a bit of an update on some of those things. So I will be meeting with Michael Lovett, Deputy CE of Department of Internal Affairs. That meeting will be on Thursday in Christchurch. There's opportunity for us, or for me, to talk a little bit more to him about actually how our systems work around Three Waters, because it's been quite clear that the Department of Internal Affairs, even though they have the responsibility for local government, don't actually understand exactly how we work with our financial systems, but also our asset management. And so there's an opportunity to have that discussion with Mr. Lovett and just basically work through some of those things where I think them having a better understanding will make sure that if the reforms do proceed as planned, that they are as informed as possible. So looking forward to that, and it's something that we've been pushing for some time, and hopefully it will be beneficial. A lot of different things going on in the future for local government reform area. But we're still doing what we can to show leadership in that particular reform. Just going through what else we've got there. Looking forward to getting the economic development strategy out in public and so on. So thank councillors for all their input into that so far. And obviously there's been a lot of work done in a relatively short time. A lot of people spoken to out in the community, and hopefully it will be something that the public, when they get the opportunity to see the strategy itself, will think this is something that's very achievable. I think those are probably the main things I wanted to cover off for the moment. I do, just make mention, because these things aren't covered in any other activity updates, just having the opportunity to go into more detail on some of the things that particularly Leanne, my EA, does, and Hayley, the events coordinator, does, was just an opportunity to show that there's quite a bit of stuff like that that's happening in the background, and again, staff doing some really good work around the organisation and in the community. So anyway, happy to take any questions or comments. Councillor Kingan.
Yeah, with regard to the rural black spots, That's something I'd like to see progressed in our district, because there are a lot of spots out there that haven't got good coverage, and it is important. We're a first world country. We should have better services, and we want to find out just exactly where our problem spots are. So this is one way of doing it, and I think we should be.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that is identified in the economic development strategy as something that needs attention. And yeah, unfortunately, we didn't take part when we could have in the Canterbury Mayoral Forum review of black spots and the identification of them. But there will be more opportunities. So there was, half the Canterbury region wasn't covered with that. Once again, we do find, I have to keep reminding that forum that, if we're doing something in our Canterbury part of our districts, in the ECAN part, we'll call it, because it's still Otago, really, that we need to be doing it in our whole district. And obviously we need to be stepping up and helping take part in these things when they happen. So thank you. Councillor Halalali.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, just wanted to make a comment as well around the broadband. It's really important with the health reforms coming up, because there is a component of the key priorities, especially for rural areas, to ensure that we can enable digital services for people living in that area. So it's just something to keep at the forefront of our minds. Thank you.
Yeah, another good point. Okay, anything else, Councillor Hopkins?
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. In addition to the broadband, I'm just curious, your very considerable range of meetings, and as has been often conveyed in the past, congratulations on the diligence. I'm curious about the podcasts. On pages 15 and 16, you've got podcast interviews with Logan Doherty, Ian Hurst, Kelly Williams, and Sally Ann. Are you doing these podcasts, or what is this?
So yeah, this is basically an idea that Damien Goodser had. These aren't strictly mayoral functions, but I'm probably on there because of that. But yeah, Damien thought it'd be good to have the podcasts of people who have made an impact in the North Otago community, or maybe are up and coming younger ones that are getting into something and doing well nationally or internationally, and also just people who have got links to different parts of our history. So it's a good opportunity to talk to people directly about some of their experiences, get some of the stories behind the scenes on how they got to where they got to, etc. So that's just been, hopefully my intention is this can be something that then goes into our archive and becomes a bit of a record, an oral history of some aspects of people's lives or the things that are in our district.
So you're the interviewer?
Yeah, so Damien and I share that role, and obviously play off each other and tell great jokes along the way. Yeah, that was another one of them. But yeah, in a way to keep it informal and obviously the people that we're talking to get them relaxed and just sharing their stories. It's been pretty good to be part of at this stage, and look forward to doing quite a lot more over the next few months. Councillor Percival.
Yeah, just going back to Bill's topic on the black spots, the Road and Controlling Authority, in conjunction with NCTA, is doing a lot of work on that and also promoting it through without combining with TAs. Also, there's a contracted company, government contracted company, has put in, to my knowledge, 4 repeating sites, one future, Carra Hill, Enfield, Cape Bunbury, to assist all the rural community. So it's an ongoing exercise funded by government, central government. So it is getting better and better.
Yeah. Crown Infrastructure Partners is the ones that are overseeing the the funding of the Black Spots campaign and the rural broadband initiative, etc. But what they've said is that I think West Coast and Canterbury are standouts for ones that have been proactive, actually identifying these places for them and actually helping drive the work that's being done on them. So it's that thing. So, well, you're making our job easier to do. We'll put the money, more of the money into your areas because you've identified this. We don't have to go and do it. So yeah, it's creating that situation where we do make people's jobs easier. So, yeah, the more we can do, the better those black spots will get covered. Councillor Tavendale.
Just, I guess, carrying on from that, I see that Becca did the work for the Mayoral Forum. I'm guessing that was paid for by individual councils that were getting the work done. And if that's the case, do we have any budget sitting there or anything so that we can actually move to get this data collected?
The Mayoral Forums have some budget to actually get on with this, so they will have paid for this. So I'm not sure how the contributions were divvied up. Usually it's on a population basis, which actually does work for us in the Canterbury sense because we have less than 10% of our population in the ECAN part of the district. But yeah, it's not. It hasn't been funded by only those councils that take part in it.
So the councils that took part, were they chosen by ECAN or was it who opted into the process?
It was who opted in. So each of particularly I think the roading departments were contacted and made the call on whether they were going to do it or not. And I don't know the details behind our decision not to, but it's not. Hopefully, this isn't the last opportunity, and we just need to make sure that we are more prepared to take part in these things when they come up. Okay, there's nothing else. I'll move to receive the report. Someone second that. Mayor Tavendale. Thank you. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to recommendations from the CCR Committee. Item 5.1. Just on my way to that. Okay, and we've got the first of all, there's the spatial plan. So we've, Mr. Cox, do you want to speak to this any further?
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. No, I don't believe it needs to be spoken to any further. We just look forward to your approval.
Deputy Mayor.
I'm not sure how you want to do this, but we have sort of traversed them all individually, and I wonder whether I can move them as a group or if people want to take them more individually.
Are people happy to take them as a group? Okay. Yeah, I've probably got just a few questions along the way on some things. So as I think Councillor Hopkins may have as well. And so perhaps we just address those first, and then I'll take the motion after that. So question to Mr. Cook. We've got the overlapping economic development strategy work happening. We're identifying opportunities to grow the economy, which will have a flow-on effect on the demand for housing and so forth. So in the population growth numbers, do you feel that we're adequately taking that potential into consideration as well?
I think, Mayor Kircher, based on the feedback from the consultants, these data studies they've done, I believe that the current figures in the report are realistic. They match current trends in terms of building work that's taking place and the trends. The spatial plan is reviewed or scheduled to be reviewed between 5 and 6 years, which is quite a short time frame, so they can be updated as the trends appear.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
I would just comment in that regard that the very first recommendation that we will vote on allows us to update the growth projections to reflect more recently available information. So if there is data that we wish to add, we can, and the passing of these resolutions will sanction that.
Okay, just gonna go through the document itself. I still had some questions. I think there's a few minor things and so on. You know, it talks about Western, but it has a photo of the area that's between Omara and Western, not Western itself. Talks about Kakanui, and I think you can see it in the distance in the photo. So there's, you know, if we're going to have this as a document for the next 10 years or whatever, be just handy to perhaps have reconsideration of some of that. So just going through looking at some of the documentation. I did find that, you know, there are references to the national policy statement on urban development, but it doesn't say what the implications are around, you know, we're saying, well, there's areas of intensification, but it doesn't actually say what the consequences are for that, you know, around building density and so forth. And I wonder whether that, you know, if you have to read this in conjunction with another document, that's never quite as good, and whether there's possibilities of having, you know, what is the implications if we have this in here.
We might invite Mr. Campbell, who's on Zoom, to respond to that. But do remember that the district plan is what forms the full framework around this.
So, David, you got comments, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mikich. Effectively, just reiterating Mr. Cook's comment on that the district plan will give effect to this, so that will provide the detail around densities, heights, those type of things, whereas the spatial plan is just identifying areas where density could be increased. But again, that has to be tested through a district plan process to see if they need to be refined and what rules would be acceptable to the community. So I accept your point that it's quite hard for people to kind of picture what the implications are in the spatial plan, but really it's just saying here are the areas that we think for sound reasons should be increased. How we do that still up to the district plan to nut out the details. So unfortunately it does leave people a wee bit in limbo, but at least they can say, well, it's likely to change, but the nature of the change will be decided through another process.
Okay. There are a few other things like that, I guess, through the, you know, references to the LUC areas, which, yeah, there's no definition of what LUC 1, 2, or 3 actually mean in the glossary. So there's some things that would be helpful for people, because you want them to be able to look at this document and say, okay, I understand what this means, as opposed to they've got to go and do some research somewhere else to understand it. So I can pass those on anyway. There are some references around off-street car parking and park and ride facilities and so on. But there's nothing in there about what we're going to do around, you know, what is the aspirations around the ride part. It's very easy parking somewhere, but when there's no public transport, there's a bit of a gap there, and I don't, yeah, I had the opportunity to go through this in more detail and looking, you know, that is saying that's very low cost, but I think if we actually are factoring in a public transport system needing to be put in place, the implications are a wee bit larger. So I don't, councillors, I don't want to relitigate all of this. I just raising some things that's, I think, could be just fine-tuned a wee bit before the final document goes out. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, like you, I have a few, this is with the, the draft spatial plan that we're going to adopt today. And I think we can probably do that and allow ourselves the opportunity to adopt it with amendments in identified areas. I, for instance, in addition to some of the things you've mentioned, I noticed, for instance, on the page 28 of the plan, it talks about redeveloped rail links between Oamaru and Dunedin, as if this was a fact. Whereas elsewhere in the document on page 34, for example, and other pages, there's references to potential public transport and indicative transport connections and things of that nature. And I think the assertion that redeveloped rail links between passenger rail links between Dunedin and Oamaru and Dunedin is also potential and shouldn't be presented as if it is a fact, which the spatial plan currently does. So there are a few things like that that I think, along with you, could be tweaked. But yeah, I don't think this is not a rewrite of the document. It's an amplification or a refinement of particular issues that may be of a detailed nature. But you're right. Before it goes out, let's get it as right as we can.
Yeah. So yeah, I do see them as clarifying rather than changing anything. So look, we'll go back to Deputy Mayor and get her to move those. And I'd also suggest we include in that the resolution on the Bushy Beach Road, which is might as well make sure we're encapsulating all of the amendments or decisions on the spatial plan. If you're happy with that. It's all to do with spatial plan. What we're doing is, making decisions on the spatial plan. So it doesn't, shouldn't matter that it's a different meeting. It's what we're making decisions on here.
Yep, no, I'm happy to do that. We've had that recommendation come through another process as well.
And so it's moved to a seconder for that. Councillor Thompson. The post, Councillor Percival. Okay. Do we have any further discussion? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, well, speaking to it, I think this is probably the right way to go, moving them on mass as a block. I'm not going to vote against them, obviously, but I do want to just register my sadness that we have agreed to remove the proposal to explore alternative uses. Now, I wish this resolution had read alternative uses for underutilised sections or areas of council reserves. I think in the discussion at the committee stage, it was acknowledged that the question posed was perhaps badly worded. The concern I have is that a badly worded question has the potential to limit and inhibit council decisions on a number of very important wellbeing issues for 6 years. Now, yes, people said they wanted reserves saved, reserves protected, and I think this issue got caught up with Forester Heights, and those two issues became sort of confused or combined. But if you look at the response to the spatial plan, you also see a very, very significant demand for cheaper housing, community housing, housing alternatives. And one of the ways the council can be a broker in providing community housing is available land at a discounted or available freely in order to make possible home ownership for people who are being currently priced out of the market. Now, it's a possibility. I'm not saying we should do it. I'm saying we could do it. And I noticed that Councillor Halaleli is nodding. And I'm pleased to see that, because to me, this is another critical area of potential council development and engagement. And I am just saddened that we have chosen to explicitly rule it out until the spatial plan is reviewed. I'm not going to vote against all the other decisions about that, but I do register my concern that we are possibly hamstringing future councils as well as ourselves, because we've only got another few months before the term expires. But that said, I'll leave it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Tavendale.
Just to speak to that part of things, originally it's set at council reserves and other council owned land, and we removed the other council owned land, recognising that there is opportunities there. At this stage though, we got a really clear steer from the community on reserves, and maybe it is different, maybe it's something about underutilised, but that wasn't put across, and it needs to actually be explained well before you can change any direction in a public document and tell the community you've listened to it. So I think this has done the only thing that we could have done, which is listen to a really clear steer from the community. There is still a number of areas that are available for building on, but like I said, this still actually allows for other council-owned land to be used. It's the reserves that we were given a really clear steer on, and I think it's really important that we put this forward. And it just shows us, and it's the same with things like Kakanui, where there is a need for growth there in the future, but right now we're not as such allowing for it because we hadn't got it right, and the community told us we hadn't got it right. So until we've actually done a little bit more work in that area, we need to listen to that, and we need to make sure any growth is mindfully done.
Yeah, and I think that's the real thing. It's, you know, there are definitely areas that potentially could be utilised with no impact at all on the amenity for the public, but we weren't clear about that. We hadn't identified where they might be. We didn't get our communication right, but there's an opportunity to actually, you know, look at that again in the future at some stage. In the meantime, I think the spatial plan has identified a good amount of area that can be utilised. We've got some non-reserve area as well, which we can look at, you know, focus our attention on, and actually make some progress rather than trying to go through more difficult processes that take a long time and won't necessarily come up with a result that's desired by the community. So yeah, it is. Yeah, we've got a reasonable amount in front of us, so let's get on with that. Councillor Holding.
Just the attachment that's supposed to be circulated as a separate PDF document. I couldn't find that in the agenda. Is that
Of the spatial plan
of the
itself?
Bushy Beach Road matter? Oh, what page is it, Jim?
It came as a separate document.
The Bushy Beach Road was, so it's a separate, it was done at a separate meeting, but it was about this, so tying that in. So that's on page 22 of the agenda. It's got some additional officer remarks and links to plan in there, but also obviously there was a more full report that the CCR meeting 2 weeks ago. Okay. Right. If there's nothing else, Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, just a very quick comment. I would have thought if we looked at the resolution CCR 2022-022, that council accepts further minor amendments for approval following the review of points A, B and C referenced below. I would have thought it gives us sufficient latitude to make the kinds of corrections and minor amendments that you raised and that I also referenced a little bit earlier.
Okay. I'm going to put it. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it is carried. Thank you, and thanks to the team for all the work that they've put in on this. It's been quite a process, and I know the public have been wanting to see the results of it. I've got the opportunity to have a document which they can look at and see where we're at. Okay, moving on to, I'm not sure I'm on the right page myself now. Page 21. So item 5.2, So ratifying the feedback to the Ministry for the Environment on the enabling local voice and accountability in the future resource management system. Councillor Hopkins moved that, seconded. Councillor Percival, thank you. Any comments? Those in favour say aye. Against? It's carried. And on to 5.2.2, the updated gambling venues policy and TAB venues policy 2022. Just check with Mr. Cook that there's nothing else to add. No, it's all good. So we're all good to go. So recommendation from the committee that we approve the policy and the proposed changes, which include the sinking lid policy. And I just really want to point out that it doesn't get rid of any machines. It just means that if businesses close down, then those machines disappear. Then people can still have their fun. Do we mute? Okay, move that. Seconded. Councillor Thompson. Okay, any discussion? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mayor Church, perhaps not surprisingly, I'm going to make one final attempt. I'm not optimistic, but I am going to make a final attempt to persuade colleagues who weren't on the committee and therefore didn't necessarily hear the submissions or vote on the matter to perhaps reconsider. I think there's a bit of class warfare going on here. I'll explain that comment in a moment or two, but I would like to invite councillors, other councillors, to we've just heard that the submitters to the spatial plan said they didn't want reserves touched and we should listen to the submitters. If that is the case, then the fact is the majority of submitters to the draft plan, to the TAB venues policy and the gambling class 4 gambling venues policy actually said don't adopt a sinking lid. And these included Waitaki Girls High School, the Licensing Trust, North Otago Rugby, who represent a lot of people in the community, as well as some of the foundations themselves. So the majority of submitters did say, don't change. And I think the decision, yes, Gary's right, it doesn't reduce or remove any machines, which are significantly lower than the threshold we've already set in the district of 140 in total. But it does put at risk an essential source of funding for community groups, clubs, faith-based services, events, all sorts of things. And as I say, the submissions, we were told in submissions that it could be that up to $1 million a year was made available to groups and community groups in this district through proceeds from gambling, from the pokie machines. 70 cents of every dollar goes back to the player. I think then the rest, majority, the difference is, the remainder, I should say, is then shared between the government and taxation and community groups. And the difficulty I have with the position we're taking is we're focusing on one form of gambling. And I think it's, if you like, it's the middle class, and I say a bit of class warfare here. I think the middle class, happy to go and buy its lotto tickets and nice, comfortable venues, is punishing the working class for using pokie machines more generally. We're quite happy to apply for funding from other gambling sources, and council agendas recently have included reports that we will be applying to lotto and other gambling funds for assistance ourselves. But we're potentially putting at risk of an important source of funding for other people in the community, which I think is a double standard. The difficulty I have with the position is we say we are concerned about problem gambling and the problems of gambling. But if you look at what we're doing today and what we're being asked to vote on, it's a bit like saying we're concerned about alcoholism, so we're going to make it harder for people to drink red wine. Yes, we were told that about half of the problems associated with gambling come from pokies, but therefore the other half come from other forms of gambling, including forms that we're going to apply for funds for. So I would just say, given that these foundations provide our community with a lot more money than we do, and there's no identified alternative source, and we're chasing people away from taxable sources of methods of gambling to the internet, where it's untaxed, unpoliced, and potentially more damaging, I would urge us to say that for the maximum of 2.5% of all gamblers who experience problems, $64 million of money is available to help them every year, and it hasn't reduced that incidence of problem gambling at all. That's the real scandal in this area. And I would urge us to actually think of our community groups who have benefited and continue to benefit, and not put their funding and future funding at risk. And I would invite colleagues to consider revoking the decision to impose a sinking lid.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hopkins. I think there are numerous points that couldn't be refuted amongst those. First of all, I think it's really very, very important that you understand that 70% of the funds do not go back to the player. Many players don't end up with less than what they actually gain, and there's no guarantee that any one player will end up with 70% back. It's yeah, it's just the way it is. If you say we shouldn't try and do anything in the one area where we do have the power to do something, it's like saying, well, we shouldn't be doing up our roads because we don't look after state highways. I don't think you can equate, you can say we shouldn't do something because actually there's all these other things where we don't have any power. It's just the reality of that one. So there's, this is not reducing any funding. Tomorrow there's be the same funding that's out there. If a business closes, and there's only a few businesses actually involved in this, most of them are organisations that are very unlikely to close, licensing trusts, Oamaru Club, places like that, the machines will carry on. So I can't see that it's actually going to diminish them. And lastly, to say that we are being hypocritical applying for the money, if this harm is happening in the community, there is a social cost to it. If we're not actually getting any benefit back because we take the stand that we're not going to apply for any funding, and so that funding won't go back to our community, that is, to me, is a wasted opportunity. I mean, while the harm is being done, there's an opportunity to get some good coming back, and we shouldn't say that we're above actually taking that. We can do a lot with that, and I can't see that situation changing in any time soon. Go to Deputy Mayor.
I totally concur. At the end of the day, we're not actually minimising the number of machines right now. We're saying into the future we need to do something differently, and we need to look at this differently. At the moment, we still have approved in our community more machines than are currently actually being used. So I think we're comfortable with the level right now, but we're saying we don't want that to grow at all, and that the best case scenario would be for that to go down. Our whole country, and certainly our community, is still very much reliant on the funds of gambling. And as a country and as a community, we need to find a better way of doing that, because it is certain members of our community that are actually covering this cost. It doesn't come from nowhere. When we talk about 2.5% of people that are problem gambling, we talk about the 2.5% that we know about. And that's actually the biggest issue that we have as a community, is the ones that we don't know about, and the people that are actually making massive effects on their family. And we're saying that, you talk about classless societies and things. It's the ones that are spending money they don't have, and it's affecting their families. That's what really matters here. As a community, we need to find a way to make sure in the future we can fund our school kids' sports uniforms, and that local play centre can still have funds to put up a shade sale. Those things still need to happen, and as a community we need to work out ways of doing that. At the moment, that money's not going away, but we are saying we need to do this differently. And I think to actually aspire to that as a community and be a healthier, safer community is a good thing. Totally agree, Councillor Hopkins, that the online is not covered well enough. It's not covered. We're not taking taxes from it as a country. We're not actually safeguarding people from it. And I think that's really clear that we need to, as a council, make sure we are clearly feeding that back to central government, and every other council needs to too. And we need to talk about that because it's not okay. You know, that there is one of those excuses where you can say, well, they're doing it, so we can do it. And it doesn't work like that. If something's wrong at a national level, we need to point that out, and we need to work as a country on fixing it. We don't sit there and keep making bad decisions because there's bad decisions made at a national level. But at the end of the day, we need to find better ways. This isn't stopping it right now. It's just putting an indication into the future saying this is not going to carry on. And, you know, hopefully that gives us actually a fair bit of time as a community to start putting some actions in place to say that perhaps the way of funding our things moving forward isn't actually reliant on our most vulnerable people.
Councillor Hallalady.
Thank you. And I think you do raise some good points, Councillor Hopkins, and I think it's good to verbalise them. I guess from me, it comes down to principles and ethics, and we shouldn't, at the end of the day, rely on people's gambling addiction to be able to fund community groups, to be able to do what they do. So I think that at the end of the day, that's where I'm coming from. We've got a mission statement that we empower our people in place to thrive. And I think that's part of our stand, is that the current model that is operating is not fit for purpose. We shouldn't be endorsing those types of values that we profit from people's gambling addictions in order to be able to be able to fund. So a lot of the good things at community groups, that whole model needs to change. So I think we can do this small bit just to kind of make a stand against it. So I guess, yeah, I'll be supporting the sinking lid. I know what it's like to be able to work with people with those addictions that are doing this. Yeah, end of the day, that's where I stand. So I'm supportive of this going forward.
Thank you. I'm going to put it now. Those in favour of the recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
And against?
No.
That's carried.
Could I have my vote against recorded, please?
Right, moving on to 5.2.4.
Would you let me move this, Mr. Chair?
Oh. Just please wait your patience. Sorry, Councillor Holding, I'd seen these additional officer remarks and thought they were related to the spatial plan. So apologies for that before. So there are some additional remarks. I'm wondering if Mr. Campbell has anything to add, or Mr. Cook.
Nothing from me, Mayor Kircher. It's just really some tidy up work to make sure that what goes out for public consumption is fit for purpose, and noting that the maps will be in a user-friendly sort of web-based version for ease of comparison of existing maps. So rather than having a whole lot of printed bound copies, it's moving with the times with technology to help facilitate that, and making sure that everything lines up and is ready to go on 1 June.
Okay, I do have a question, David. We've approved a 3-month engagement period, and the more I've been thinking about it lately, the more I'm concerned that it's just very, very long. It's very, you know, we're talking about, I think, 24 sessions and pop-up sessions in Oamaru alone, and you know, just looking at the commitment for staff and councillors over the next 3 months, whether that's actually the best whether we're going to get enough benefit as opposed to looking at, say, a 2-month period. So I know this has gone past the comms portfolio, but it just, you know, we've seen the the engagement, particularly with the annual plan. There's been engagement with the spatial plan, which has been positive, but yeah, is there a need to have it for quite such a period?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Kircher. again, it is a substantial document to work through with, around 1,200 pages plus the maps, and we're also inviting groups to talk with us. So it allows us to get into their meeting cycles, give them time to actually digest some of it, because if we say, here it is 1 June, and then they want to meet and discuss it in July, once they've had a look at it, they don't have a lot of time then to feedback. So we're trying to be generous and accommodating. Certainly with our drop-in sessions, we can dial those back in August if it starts to tail off. So we're just saying, we're scheduling these dates, but if the numbers don't stack up, we simply won't need to use them all. And the Oamaru one, certainly around the district, we're limiting that pretty much to 1 visit per place, except like St Palmerston. So we are trying to be efficient there, but just acknowledging that the size and scope of the document, to give those groups enough time to look at it, particularly the NGOs, other entities we work with, so we're not sort of rushing it and then getting asked for extensions at the end. So yeah, the main reason just sheerly because of the size of it alone.
Yeah, so I think it's important that people understand this is very much an informal process of getting feedback, not full submissions. And on a plan that we've been working for over 7 years, and trying to keep it progressing as well as we can. So I just got some concerns, but Mr. Cook, and then.
Thank you, Mika. And I appreciate your comments and the concern you have for the officers' workload. I would suggest that we front load the drop-in sessions in the first 6 weeks, without necessarily publishing the second period of dates for the formalised drop-in sessions, and then we can flex those to the parts of the district where we think they're most valuable, and if they're not being well supported by members of the community, then we don't need officers sitting there waiting for people. But that would allow, as Mr. Campbell says, the more sort of structured feedback coming back from large organisations, and the time for them to read the document and submit their feedback in a formal fashion.
Councillor Tavendale.
I definitely share your concern around consultation fatigue. I think there's been a lot of it. I personally don't feel like cutting the time frame of it back is going to fix that. Perhaps we don't need as many sessions as we've got, and I think that's the way Mr. Cook sort of suggested during the first part of things is probably the way to go. But I guess just with such a big document, and if you actually want people to have time to get across it and do it meaningfully, then I'd not like to see us scrimp on that, because I just feel that people are just going to put it in the too hard basket and it won't happen. And this is quite it's one of those major documents that we have around the council table that impacts on so many aspects of people's lives, that the work we do from here to actually have people understand how important this document is, it can't be underestimated, I guess. And so I'd like to see us keep the 3 months, but I take your point that perhaps we don't need to just be going full on with officer time that whole time. Maybe some of it's just for giving people that opportunity to go away and spend time on their submissions and going through the document.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that until you raised it, and I thought, when you raised it, I thought, yes, could well be right. Then, thinking it through, we've spent an awful lot of time on this, a huge amount of time, more than I would have liked or even expected, but it's happened. On that said, the public hasn't spent any time on it as yet. It's a massively important document. I believe district plans are the most important documents councils produce. We don't have a written constitution in New Zealand, but in a sense, this is a written constitution for land use and the environment. That's what a district plan is. It's a kind of constitutional document as to how the environment is used, benefits people, and protects itself. So it's a critical document, and we want this initial engagement to be relaxed, to be casual, and we want people to believe, and I'm personally determined to make sure that their belief is justified. We want them to believe that their opinions will matter and influence the document. So I think we need a bit of time to grow it. Let's by all means pull back on the number of workshops and the like. But at this stage, along with the Deputy Mayor, I would want to keep the time frame, because I think there's an awful lot of complexity and even debate that may arise during the draft draft plan consultation process. So I think by all means, let's pull fixtures and events out of the calendar, but not shorten it. I think on balance, I would argue for it'll benefit us at the proposed plan stage. I think we may well be able to have that more succinct and concise if we take a little bit more time now.
Councillor Kingan.
Yeah, look, there will be targeted chapters in this. People won't thumb through the whole thing, I don't think, but they'll go to particular chapters which will be of interest to them. And so there will be, and it's almost hard to know just what sort of depth people will want to be involved. So it's a bit of a wait and see. But I think there'll be, but my understanding is that there is as part of the promotion and the education of what the plan actually involves, is going to be some explanation for some of those particular chapters.
Yeah, that's, yeah. It would take a special kind of masochist to go through the whole document, I think, but people.
I have done that, Mayor Kircher.
Point proven. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, people will go to the bits, you know, if they're in the rural sector, they will go to the rural chapters and look at the rules and so forth with that. And, you know, so there will be a lot of that, cherry picking and so on. So, yeah, I just, I think, well, yeah, if it's a case of let's see how it goes and so on, that's okay. I would get worried that we agree to do 3 months and then we get 2 months in and things are really dying off. But actually, what are we going to do about the person who's actually waiting for that last week and or those people or those organisations or whatever, because they've been told they've got 3 months. So yeah, we need to make a decision, I think, before we start the consultation, so that we actually go out there. Sorry, the engagement, consultation. But anyway, yeah, we'll see how the decision goes on this. It's basically the decision that we're being asked for is to start the engagement on the 1st of June. So, Councillor Hopkins, you would like to move that?
Would you let me move it now?
I shall let you do that.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Councillor Tavendale seconding that. So, any further discussions on the recommendation on the motion? I'll put it. Those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Okay. Does anyone want to suggest a different time frame, or are we happy with where it's at? Okay, we'll leave it at that. Okay, going to item 5.3, recommendation from the Assets Committee on the Yamarama drinking water supply upgrade, and we've been provided, there was a resolution from the committee requesting further information, so that's been provided. Mr. Hope, do you want to speak to any of the extra information, or is it just a matter of taking questions?
I think questions are going to be more productive.
Okay, right, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got concerns as to where we're moving in this whole area of expenditure. I note that the planned tanker filling station at Palmerston that we've been working through, the projected costs on that have increased 40% in the last few months. So whilst we have a desire to ensure that these projects are completed, we appear to be operating in a market where costs are just going ballistic. And I wonder whether we really need to just draw breath and re-strategize what we're doing in this space.
I will ask for some response, whether it's Mr. Hope or Mr. Phillips, but certainly, there is concern around the inflationary pressures and also potentially the changes of standards and so on, which are really pushing prices up on what we're estimating or what we've estimated in the long-term plan. So what are we doing around addressing that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And Mr. Phillips or Mr. Pacey might supplement my response, but I think the key is a lot of the initial work is refining design and getting a better estimate of the cost in many cases, because we do recognise we will be operating in a constrained market, and then really reporting back to you when there are significant cost variances. We're also looking at really alternate ways of procuring a lot of these items so that they can be delivered more cost effectively, particularly if we're reasonably flexible about timeframes, which I think is one of the big changes in approving a longer term program of work rather than trying really having a 12-month focus. So no, we recognise as officers the cost pressures and the ongoing implications of those, but I think it is really important that these items are advanced so we have a good understanding of the nature of the issues and the potential costs, and we'll come back to council if they're getting outside of the parameters that are actually approved in the sort of the delegations and procurement policies. So it's not just charging on regardless of the cost, but having these items well designed for whatever the future is of in the Three Waters space will serve council well.
Okay, you got a question, Councillor Hopkins?
Well, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes. Just my question perhaps then in relation to the recommendations in front of us, I'm looking at number 3, and one question was, why is it here? Second question is, given what Councillor Thompson has said, and I absolutely agree with him, I rather suspect, I'm asking whether we think that further to that the council requests further assurance. Let's not waste time getting something to a committee and then going to council. I think this is important enough to go directly to us. So my question is, would other members agree that perhaps, given Councillor Thompson's concerns, as I say, which I absolutely share, that number 3 should read that the council requests further assurance?
Look, I think, it's probably something where we can, we need to have a better discussion with staff on it. The concern I have is that with this particular report has been, that we've gone out and we've said we need a building and we're budgeting $670,000 for us. As soon as any tenderers look at this sort of information, it's like, well, we know what the budget is, and it becomes a bit self-fulfilling. So there are challenges around that as well, and I don't know, there's not an easy way around it, but it's one of those situations for people who believe we should do everything in public session. It does count against ratepayers sometimes when that sort of information goes out, but we need to have it. Around assurances, I think it's really a case of having a session with a workshop with staff and going through where are the pressures happening and look at those situations, because we're not going to have any fewer. My suggestion around the recommendations from the committee is that the 3 would disappear, and I've actually written as an alternative 3 that progress reports are included in the assets group activity update, and number 3 that progress reports are included in the assets group activity update, and that final costs are reported to council at the completion of the project, because there's significant changes from the original budget. And, I think we need to understand, with these estimates that we made in all these different areas, how much, how accurate are they, and, where are the increases really happening? So having a better understanding of that's part of the assurance that you're asking for, I think, Councillor Hopkins, as well. Because it's really important, as much as we might budget something, it's like, if you can get something done for less, then we need officers to make every effort to do that. Councillor Wallstein?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Kircher. Just to really back up what Councillor Thompson said too, but I think this has probably been a real object lesson for the water staff. I think their original estimates and budgets were a bit on the light side, and the circumstances that arose that they hadn't thought it would happen, so they had to reassess the whole thing. But I think Mr. Phillips, for his report, showed where the extra costs have gone. But I do think they do need to take it on the chin that they were a bit light in this occasion and need to do better in future.
Thank you. Look, I'm going to move the recommendations 1 and 2, and with that alternative number 3, so that we do get updates on this and we do get an overall report coming back to us on, it doesn't just disappear, never to be seen again, so that we can help us have a better understanding. So if people, someone like to second the motion? So Councillor Kingham? Okay. It allows staff to get on and get this job done. Half of it, over half it's funded, no, just under half of it's funded by external funding. So it's still being cost effective for the community in that respect, but they are going to get a better product as well. Councillor Percival.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think with this, we're between a rock and a hard place. And I think most of us felt blindsided when we first had advice of this request. But in the process, we've asked for information, and we have that has been supplied. For a project that, in my knowledge or my investigation, was first promoted close to 12 years ago, one wonders why it's taken so long to action. What does concern me is that this huge funding that we're doing doesn't appear to address the distribution infrastructure. So, which to me is part and parcel with an upgrade of the supply. So is this yet to come? This another massive amount of funding for that? So that's what concerns me. But otherwise, I think we're stuck with this. We've got the explanation, and I will have to support it.
I think we're just very mindful of time because we are running out, and mostly that's my fault. So I apologise for that. But Councillor Hopkins, you got something quickly to add?
Look, yes, very quickly. I will be brief. The one thing that causes me anxiety, there is an elephant in the room here, and that is that if we do loan fund the 1.62 million and Three Waters doesn't proceed, we've still got a very big issue then to address as to who pays that. And increasingly we are coming up against the impossibility of small communities to sustain the cost of infrastructure improvement alone on a standalone basis. So all I'm flagging is there's a potential problem in the middle of this.
Yep. No, I think it's something we all appreciate is there as well, as we struggle to provide expensive upgrades to small numbers of consumers. So I'm going to put what we've got. So just to repeat number 3, the progress reports are included in the Assets Group activity update, and the final costs are reported to council at the completion of the project. So we'll put that, those 3 parts, all in favour say aye. Aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. Right, we go to through these as quickly as we can now. 5.3.2, waste minimisation grants approval process. Councillor Tavendale, you're moving that. Seconded, Councillor Holding. Any discussion? I'll put it. Those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against, it's carried. The road stopping of James Road in Herbert. Moved Councillor Hopkins. Thank you, Councillor King, and seconded that. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, that's carried. Right. Let's move to item 6.1. So ratification of our submission on managing exotic afforestation incentives. Mr. Cook, do you want to speak very briefly to this?
I'll speak very briefly. Yeah, all we're asking for is the ratification of the submission. Very complex technical subject. We do have Mrs. Van der Speck online who prepared it, but I would suggest that given the time, we don't get stuck in the detail.
Okay, and this is gone. It's been signed by the chair of Ccr Committee and disappeared off. So it was a brilliant submission, but we do need to ratify it. So someone like to move? Councillor Thompson, Councillor Harley, seconded that. So I'll put that. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
And against, it's carried. And Councillor Percival, you just wanted to add a comment. Sorry.
I just wanted to query the so-called section of summary of decision-making criteria. And the only indicator on there is policy plan moderate. I would have thought this had significant effects with community views, significance, with environmental considerations, cultural considerations, economic considerations. So if it was so obscure, why on earth are we talking about it? I mean, it's ridiculous.
I think
comes into it.
I think it's
makes sense to me.
It's in relevance in reference to the making the submission, not what the submission's about. So obviously the topic is really important. So deciding to make a submission, the impact we're going to have with that submission versus, it's not about the topic itself, which is, I totally agree with you on all those things. It is massive. But us making a submission or not is, how much weight will they give it? It makes to everything else. So it's a slight difference in that. Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, look, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I was mildly surprised at the fact that, for instance, a whole lot of no comments from us on quite important issues on pages 37 and 38 of the agenda, including penalties and things of that nature. I'm just curious to know, are you satisfied that this is feisty enough? Because, I mean, you were quite outspoken about carbon forestry, as indeed have many of us been. And it seemed to me that perhaps we were a wee bit more muted than you might have wanted us to be. I'm just curious to know, are you satisfied that we've pushed as hard as we can? Or this is only the beginning, obviously. We can fight a bit more and harder, but what's your view on it?
I probably would have had some things different, but it wasn't my submission, and it needed to be basically ask Deputy Mayor whether she wants to make a comment on it since she signed it. But it's one of those things where some assumptions needed to be made along the way. I do think it was shared at the time for feedback, but anyway, ask Deputy Mayor.
I think when you go back to process, and maybe we need to look at this because there's just so many of these coming through, and to be fair, quite often I'll have something in that needs to be in the next day or something in with every other bit of workload. You're scanning it a lot quicker than you'd like to, and you're not putting the work into it you'd like to. And there's been quite a huge number of these come through lately that's sort of landing on, I guess, Victoria and then landing on my shoulders a wee bit. And you're not confident that you're definitely getting it right and getting the perception of council through, but you literally just don't have the time frame to do anything else about it. So I don't know how we address that, because I am finding it a lot to take on, and a lot of areas you look over and go, well, I don't think there's going to be anything that upsets people overly here. I think the general gist of things is something that councillors are going to support, but yeah, it probably isn't giving councillors enough time to strongly stamp our thoughts onto it. But that's not to take away from the work that the officers are doing, because I'm being put in this position because they're being put in this position, and everyone's under the pump somewhat.
I'm going to put it, oh no, I have put it already. Yes. Right, so moving on to 6.2, and I'm sorry, I should have declared an interest in this particular one. Kind of does involve me. Appointment of council trustee to Observatory Retirement Village. So just ask the governance to note that declaration of interest, and ask the deputy mayor to chair this particular one.
I'm happy to move.
Right.
the recommendation.
I moved councillor Hopkins, seconded councillor.
I just want to speak.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Seconder councillor King and councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. I just have some reservations about this. I look at the councillors to my left and right and think they'd be suitably more qualified because they'll possibly be on site and would save travelling.
Thank you, councillor Thompson. We'll take that on board in future discussions. No, we won't. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, very briefly, it makes perfect sense. And fatuous and unwarranted smart-ass comments about age aside, which are beginning to become quite annoying. I think it's entirely appropriate for Gary to do this for the rest of the term. It's absolutely sensible, and I was happy to move it on that basis.
Thank you. Well, I'll put that. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? That's carried, and I'll pass back to the mayor.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the decision. It's an exciting organisation to be involved in, and doing some really good, positive things, and yeah, pleased to be involved. Just moving on to 6.3, letters of expectation. So just probably, yeah, are there any comments or questions before we adopt these? Councillor Thompson.
I'm happy to actually move them as written, Your Worship.
Thank you. And second.
Mr. Palmer was going to introduce this.
Seconded is Deputy Mayor, but Mr. Palmley is online and is going to speak to this.
Yeah, good morning. Just very briefly, just a bit of background in terms of these letters. So whilst our council-controlled organisations are arm's length and have their own boards, they're owned by the council, or in one case 50% owned, and should be seen as part of how we deliver for the district. We're not required to issue letters of expectation, but they're a useful tool in clarifying how we want these companies to deliver your priorities for the district. And so the letters have been supplied as draft for comment to the chief executives and chairs of those various organisations, and therefore we'll recommend them for approval.
Yeah, thank you. It's letters of expectation haven't been used as well as they should have in the last few years, just because of a number of reasons, but they are the way that we can best direct our companies to perform in the way that we want them to, and it doesn't require them to take on board what we have to say, but obviously they're all interested in what our view are and what our expectations are, and it is something we need to make sure we are on top of every year. as they set their statements of intent about how they will carry out their businesses. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, briefly, I'm happy with all the letters of intent, letters of expectation, except I don't think we're being honest with ourselves or our CCO with regard to Whitestone. We've got two objectives, or at the start, we want the company to grow the business and return to the council and community to support improved wellbeing. And we say that we want to return after tax to opening equity of 8% minimum. And then we proceed, in my view, to impose upon them a whole series of contradictory expectations that may have the potential to reduce that return, like supporting the council in delivering its ambitious capital investment program, including investment in water infrastructure and regeneration of Yamarama Harbour, partnering more generally with council and other organisations to further the interests of the district. I mean, we either want them to give us 8% on opening equity or not. And in my view, the letter of expectation should say, do the business. And the other things can be suggested as things we would like to see, but they should not be achieved at the cost of that primary objective of a CCO in a very problematic business sector.
Essentially, this is, in some ways, this is a negotiation, but the reality is that actually asking them to be involved in those things it benefits us because we get on and get those things done, but it benefits them because it's actually giving them work and identifying that this is our CCO, this is our contracting company, and this is a two-way street to helping them. So on the one hand, yes, we want you to give an 8% return, but on the other hand, we're going to help you do that. Not by paying over the odds on work or anything like that, but actually working closely with them to identify how can we help them achieve that particular outcome. And they're quite within their rights in the statement of intent to push back and say, if they can't do the 8% and do some of these other things, then they need to be able to say that as well, and we need to listen to that. Mr. Palmer, anything to add, or are you happy with that?
I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of number 3, if it's done in the right way, it should be complementary, not contradictory to the 8%. And number 4, there is an appetite for working more closely together amongst a number of organisations locally to secure economies of scale. We're all battling some of the same battles in terms of securing the skills we need. And so that would be helpful to Whitestone as well. All these issues have been discussed with Whitestone. They haven't pushed back on those particular issues. They see them as helpful rather than hindering.
Okay, we'll put the motion that we accept those. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Against, it's carried. Now moving on to item 6.4, which is the Waitaki District Health Services Limited 2020 to 21 annual report. Obviously, this report's late. There has been a number of reasons for that, which I think we're probably all very aware of around some of the complexities of having to incorporate retirement village accounts into the hospital accounts and resourcing and so on as well. So we've got the chair, Helen Elgar, of the board online, and Mr. Keith Marshall, CEO, is also online. So welcome to you both. I ask you to perhaps speak to the annual report first.
Kia ora everyone. On behalf of directors, Keith and I are pleased to present to you the Waitaki District Health Services Limited Group Consolidated Financial Statements for the year ended 30 June 2021. We do need to acknowledge and apologise for the lateness of bringing these to you, but the audit was complicated due to the inclusion of the group accounts, which Mayor Kircher has just referred to. And this was exacerbated by the impacts of COVID on personnel, which caused us some challenges as we were attempting to finalise the audit. The financial result for the company is not as we expected, but key impacts arose from a combination of COVID-related costs, alongside staff shortages necessitating the use of contracted medical staff as highlighted by the auditors. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the document, so if you're comfortable, we would take the document as read, and I'm more than happy to respond to any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much. So, councillors, any questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I note the comment you made. I do congratulate the board on meeting all of the non-financial targets at the end of the report, but you didn't meet the financial ones. I'm just curious to know, I'm looking at the page 5 of your report, or 61 of our agenda. There's a big move at the bottom of the pay scale. You've got 18 people earning between 100,000 and 140 as against 9. Is that the move away from locums to permanent appointments, or what's going on there to start with, please?
I'll ask Keith to respond to this.
That's the joys of consolidated audits, Jim. Look, that is exactly the situation that you've identified. And in any given year, if you look back at past audited results from the company, you'll also see that fluctuation in numbers of people earning more than $100,000. And that really does depend on the timing at which fixed term contractors come on board and which salaried medical staff come on board, who tend to be the majority of those higher paid positions.
Okay, look, if I may, just supplementary to that, on page 65 of our agenda and page 9 of your report, there are two things that concerned me on that page, and I wouldn't mind comment from both of you or either of you. First of all, it seems to me, if you look at all the other increases in costs, it looks to me as though the Southern District Health Board is shortchanging us, because the amount that they've given us has only gone up about $100,000 in over the difference in the 2 years, 2020, 11,251,705, 11,361,697. So their increase is considerably less than almost everything else here, including notably personnel costs, which look as though they've gone up $2 million. So what's your comment? Is the Southern District Health Board essentially denying us funds we should get? And why is there a $2 million increase in personnel costs?
So if I might, again, that's one of the issues with consolidating the accounts, is it makes it difficult to tell the difference between ourselves as the company and Observatory Village. So some of those personnel costs are associated with the village, and they're also associated with increased revenues, which you can also see. That's one of the difficulties of the consolidated accounts. In respect to the contract with Southern DHB, those contracts were established 4 or 5 years ago now. They're just, we're in the process of renegotiating them at the moment. And they had pretty much locked in conditions around deliveries and increases. So in a way, those funding levels were bound up. But you'll recall back to the budget last year and the issues that came in last year around pay rises and the general movement in wages. And those were pretty much frozen, and that was largely the approach that was taken across the funding contracts. In any given year, as a company, we will suffer overs and unders in delivery. So depending on the amount of COVID disruption, there will be overs and unders in the delivery of service provision as well. But the cost increases that Helen briefly touched on, in a nutshell, we're really short-staffed at the moment. The entire health sector is really, really short-staffed at the moment. What that means is people have to take on extra shifts. or that we use contractors. In the case of our doctors, that's generally a mixture of locums and contractors and fixed termers, which are more expensive. And in terms of our nursing staff, that generally means additional shifts, and additional shifts come at overtime rates. So you'll see a combination of factors at play in the staff costs, mostly around short staffing and contract and locum staff, but not entirely around those things.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Someone would like to move, we receive the annual report. Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Wallstein. Any further discussion? Put it, so those in favour say aye. Aye. Against is carried. Thank you. And thank you, Keith and Helen, on that one. Now go to 6.5. Where we've got the draft statement of intent for the 22 to 23 year. Keith or Helen, do you want to speak to this one?
If I can start, and then I'll hand it over to Keith. I'd just like to say that the draft document reflects the health reform and potential opportunities, and we'd also like to highlight, which has been highlighted in the previous agenda item, that there are inherent difficulties associated with the directive to group the accounts with Observatory Village. And we do need to resolve that issue so that we have more transparency and clarity. In addition to that, we are engaging with Council Exec CE and with Mr. Hope around our letter of expectation, because this will have quite an influence in the delivery of our SOI. But that's all I had to say, Keith.
Thank you, Helen. Look, the SOI process is always an interesting one for council in terms of being able to express what you're looking for and us attempting to reflect that back to you. And I know this isn't the item that will be discussed later, but the letter of expectation draft that we have seen, in my experience, both on the council chief executive side and also in health, that's a fantastic letter of expectation. The tricky part for us at the moment is we are incredibly short-staffed. Helen gave her apologies for the lack of financials. We just, at the moment, don't have any finance staff on board, so that's proving quite difficult for us. But what you can see in the SOI is exactly as Helen has expressed. It is quite difficult for us to represent an SOI for the entirety of the group across Observatory Village when I know we're expected to consolidate that for auditing purposes, but it does make it quite tricky in terms of representing that into an SOI. So what you have is the draft. We fully expect to redraft the draft, if I'm allowed to say such things, once the letter of expectation discussion gets concluded and we can present that back to you. And I'm fully aware that we need to be presenting our 6 monthly performance results as well. So when the final SOI comes back to you, it'll come back to you with financials included, and also it'll be redrafted to include and make sure that we cover off all of the elements you're raising in the letter of expectation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Keith. Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thanks, Helen and Keith, for your comments. I just noticed on page 116 of our agenda, your statement in this draft SOI, for the purpose of transparency, in addition to these consolidated accounts, shareholder will provide the minimum of separate accounts for each of the entities. So I look forward to receiving those. Thank you, Keith, in due course, so that we can actually see the results of each arm of the group, rather than this consolidated report, which really doesn't provide much information at all. I'm not criticising you in the slightest for that.
No, it's a problem with the system, and really pleasing to see the focus being put on, can we untangle this particular situation with the Office of the Auditor General to actually provide greater transparency and better accountability, which is what we're all after. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah.
Can I just, perhaps Mayor Kircher, you could clarify this. Is everything in this draft statement of intent available to the public? It's part of the public agenda. There are certain items, certain lines here highlighted in yellow. Have they been made available to councillors only, or are they part of the public document? Yeah, Mr. Hope is nodding they're part of the public document. Can somebody please then perhaps clarify what the sentence means? Note NB, this draft SOI does not include Observatory Village, and the current intention is to dissolve WDHST. It's pretty major. Well, potentially, it's not pretty major. Okay. Can somebody explain why it isn't? I thought it was.
No, that is the Waitaki District Health Services Trust.
Exactly.
The trust was essentially created when the hospital company was originally established because the hospital company couldn't reach charitable status. That has subsequently been resolved. So essentially the trust is a redundant instrument that serves little purpose. So it's just an administrative tidy up.
I'm happy.
Keith's got something. Oh, sorry. Mr. Marshall's got something to say as well.
And I'd further add to Paul's comment, it was an instrument which was designed in the early days of the process, but the company had signalled, I think in last year's process, the intention to look at the trust itself with a view to dissolving that, just because it was proving a bit of a burden in terms of additional audit requirements and management processes around it. And I think you'll recall from either last year or the previous year's audit reports about the questions of the nature of the trustee appointments and the way in which those were established, given the embedded nature of the trust within the company structure. So it really is a bit of an administrative overkill at the moment. I think we'll all be better served once we get that tidied up.
And I think something that you'll probably enjoy, Councillor, perhaps a full stop rather than a comma might have been useful there.
Okay, I'm going to move the recommendations. Someone got in seconds. Councillor Thompson, thank you. No further discussion. I'll put it. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. That finishes the public part of the agenda. We've just got a couple of items in public excluded. So I'd like to move we go into public excluded. Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Wallstein, thank you. And those in favour say aye. Aye. And against? That is carried. So thank you very much, everyone, for participation in this public part of the meeting, and we'll now adjourn. We'll make the changeover and grab some morning tea. Thank you.